Do you ever have those days where you're just feeling a little low? And then you have those days where you're feeling so energized and on top of the world. This is what we're talking about today on the show. Because sometimes we are in our flow state, and sometimes we are in just the opposite. So, we're going to be talking today with an expert that's going to talk about not just the science behind how we are wired, but how when you live in joy and you get into your true state of flow, you're going to be able to connect not only with yourself, but you're going to connect with a deeper passion and be able to serve at a higher level. So stay tuned. I'm Clara Capano, and this is Women Winning Their Way. Well, welcome to another edition of Women Winning Their Way. I am so excited today to be joined by a woman who has so many different facets to her. And Diane Ellen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here.
We are going to have a great conversation. Before we dive in, the name of the show is Women Winning Their Way. When you hear that, what comes to mind for you?
Wow. Women owning their power. And, I think that word power can be, I don't know, I think people take it in a lot of different ways. I think sometimes being in your power is actually very quiet,
Mm.
like being really aligned with yourself and just being you, right? And I think that has a lot to do with power.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. So let me then ask you and take it a step further. Have you always lived in your power? Was there maybe ever a time where you were not in alignment with your power and you had to shift the game to get that back for yourself?
Oh boy. Yeah. For those of you who are listening, Claire and I already know each other. We already had this conversation. She knows that story. Yeah, let's just dive right in. It was a difficult time in my life. I'm a violinist and did the whole training, right? The whole, years of dedication to learning to play the violin. I went to New York City to get my training, like the top-notch teachers. Had some issues getting a job, but once I did, I had like this amazing dream job where I was able to fulfill on everything that I had trained on, right? I think so many of us train and learn so many things, but then when we're actually in our work, we don't use all that training, right?
So true.
So when I got to that place in my life where I was teaching a lot of violin students, I was the lead violinist in an orchestra that's the first violinist and second in command to the conductor. Everything came to everything that I've ever learned, all my dormant skills, right, just came to life.
Mhm.
And I was actually able to be like really fully, that was the full expression of my musical career, was that job. And it was about 15 years in, my son, teenage rebellion, full on teenage rebellion. And he was depressed at the same time. He was also 18. And that meant he was calling the adult card. So it was a very scary time because in his senior year, he was 18 and I could not help him, right? He was not open to anything. It was very difficult to watch. At the same time, my mom got Alzheimer's. So during this time, I was playing, it was literally a Beethoven symphony, sitting on stage, and I was numb. I could not feel anything. And I think that when you go hear music, you expect to hear the musicians getting into the music. And getting into the music is basically getting into your flow state. And when a musician gets into their flow state and they're getting into the music, they're providing a transformational experience for the audience because
Right.
they're projecting their emotions right through. I was gone. Like I was numb. It felt like the part of me that used to make me tick was completely shut down.
Wow.
And it was like, where is it? Right. It was very strange. During the time I took care of my mom, I thought that putting flow on the back burner was the right thing to do.
Mhm.
During this time, my students started leaving me for other teachers.
Yeah.
I was so off my game. I took a year's leave from the orchestra because I was like, I am not serving you all. A year later, I still hadn't worked it out. And I told them I cannot come back because it would not be of any help at all.
Mhm.
So I sold my gorgeous antique violin. I really thought I was completely done with the violin, like done. Now, I love public speaking, just like you, Clara.
Mhm.
And I was working on my public speaking career at that time. But everyone would say to me, Diane, can you not marry the violin playing with the public speaking? And I was like, no, these two worlds will never collide.
Mhm.
So fast forward a few years later, I'm sitting on stage playing a Beethoven symphony. No, excuse me, I already did that. I'm not sitting on stage. I was sitting in a movie theater watching a documentary
Mm.
about counterculture artists. And they're questioning everything. Who's to say this is art? Who's to say this is not art? This art's valuable. This art's not valuable. And then they were also questioning, like, if we're going to create our own business and our own museum, who's to say that we all have to have, a leader? Why can't we all be leaders? Why can't this be equal, right? They were questioning everything. And it was so thought provoking. Couldn't sleep that night. And for some reason, I could feel the power of the violin coming back on stage with me.
Yeah.
And so I borrowed a violin that next morning, played some Bach, no, played a pop tune, yes. And like Clara, literally, it took me 10 minutes to figure out I wasn't done playing the violin.
Yeah.
I was done playing classical music. But
Exactly.
it was confusing
Mhm.
because there was so much going on with my family life, right? And I know we all have these storms in our lives. I just reacted really strongly, right? Anyways, it was confusing. So, okay, I'm done with classical music. A week later, I borrow an electric violin. 6 weeks later, I'm playing my own music, combining it with the speaking, and it's finally my speaking career takes off because all of the parts of me are now right included. And when I opened up to say by saying, being in your power is sometimes a very quiet thing. It's just being who you are, right?
Definitely. And,
And it
there's so
wasn't
many different levels to this. And I want to, kind of go in and have a few questions. I want to get into talking about the flow state. But before we do that, because I know that's going to be a big part of our conversation, I want to just rewind because you had this moment where all of a sudden you had done all this training and you now realized, I don't think I want to do that. And I think there's a lot of people that have done that. They maybe went to medical school or law school or they got married or whatever. And we're like, I don't think this is where I'm supposed to be. Was there ever a feeling of fear, of terror, of like, oh crap, I did all this. And now what am I supposed to do?
exactly. Yeah. There was quite a few years of fear.
Mm-hmm. And what did you do during that time? Did you try new things? Did you meditate? Like, did you go back to school? What were some things that you did to sort of again find find the peace with yourself, or did you just sort of live in this uncertainty?
Well, I was pretty focused on public speaking.
Mhm.
And so if you take a look at what was going on, I was in pursuit of speaking engagements, but I kept changing the niche, right?
Mhm.
Who am I speaking to? Is it these people? Is it those people? Am I only speaking to women, right? And I would say that that was a big part of that like process.
Mhm.
And then it wasn't until you know I always loved listening to TEDx talks, and I always thought, oh my gosh, if I could do one, right? And you know how when you talk with people, like they'll pull different things out of you that you might not pull out of yourself if you were just kind
Mhm.
of sitting there with yourself. And so every time I filled out a TEDx application to speak, they were worded just different enough that it started to pull things out of me.
Mhm.
And so it was kind of fun. Every once in a while I'd get into in a mood. It's like, oh, I want to go fill out some TEDx applications. And so one day I came up with this statement, and it was, get into your life like a musician gets into the music. And after I came up with that, every single TEDx talk that I applied for, I got an interview for. So I was like, ooh, I hit on something. So, to answer your question, it was like a long journey of experimenting this and that and this and that. But when I came up with that statement, that's like, just like when the violin came together with the speaking, that statement, okay, boom, now we're in another place. Things just starting to gel. So
Yeah.
it was a lot of trial and error.
Yeah. And I think that that's normal. I think, it is. And that's what we have to do. And I think a lot of people do not give themselves the room or the grace. I know that there have been times, because I've been one of those people that was sort of trying to find myself, especially in college. I changed my major 7 times, and I had so many people that were like, what are you going to do now? And they almost made me feel bad for dipping my toe in so many different ponds, but that was sort of part of my process, because
Yeah.
innately I knew it. And I think it's just a great lesson that when you're on this trajectory of doing the pivot, of trying to find where you belong, don't feel bad if it takes you time.
Yeah.
I always thought there was something wrong with me. My oldest sister always knew she wanted to be an artist. My other sister knew she sort of wanted to be in fashion, or, creating beauty. And I was kind of like, well, I like this, I like this, I like this. And I always thought there was something wrong. I
Mm-mm.
think there is
Yeah.
nothing wrong with you when you've just got to embrace that. And like you said, as you start to listen, you start to piece it together. And it
But
turns into, you find exactly what you were looking for.
the thing is that even though you were doing what did you say, 7 different majors?
Mhm.
So the thing is that you were on the path.
Yep,
There's so many people who don't even say yes to themselves to get on the
I
path.
know. And the whole time I thought I was so lost, when actually I wasn't as lost as I thought, but I only know this now looking
Of
back.
course.
So,
Right.
and I think that's, one of the things, they talk about a lot now. And, my son is now 19. It's the gap year. And I think it's such a beautiful thing
Mhm.
to give them the space. Like you said, sometimes you find the answers in the quiet, and you do
Yeah.
that, and just giving the space. And I want to now dovetail into this concept of the flow state, because you're talking about it with music, and I can really picture it. I mean, I can see those violinists and the flute players and the guitar. They're like into it, they're moving their body, they're one with the music and the harmony and with what they're doing. And some people call that being in the zone.
Yeah.
And I just would love to hear more about, how do you define the flow state, and how do we either know, how do you kind of break it down for us?
Yeah. So, the thing about when I was changing career is that I already had like decades of being a violinist.
Hmm.
And when you are spending hours of time in flow, you are losing all sense of time
Hmm.
because you love what you're doing. You lose a sense of self. Literally, your inner critic and your fight or flight response gets turned off when you're in flow due to the neuroscience of flow.
Hmm.
Things come together with a sense of ease, like when you get more done in 30 minutes than you had in the last 3 days, right?
Hmm.
You've got ideas and insights coming in from out of the blue. You're in a positive feedback loop. So a negative feedback loop is like when you're having to use your discipline and your willpower to get your work done. But when
Hmm.
you're in a positive feedback loop, you're working in so much joy. It's so invigorating that your own work refuels you. And then overall, it impacts your mental health. You are more, you have more meaning, joy, and fulfillment in your life. And because I had so many decades in that, when I was in that searching time of my life, I knew I was looking for that again, but just in a different way, in a different place, right? So I knew, I think I had a carrot, even though I was going through that journey of trying all these different niches. Who am I going to speak to? What's my message, right? Turns out it is what I'm talking about, which is like being in your flow state. So the flow state falls under the umbrella of positive psychology. And the neuroscience of flow is such that you've got the peak performance hormones that get released are anandamide, endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. And that's why you experience those things like euphoria and peak performance, rising to the occasion, motivation, and overall happiness.
Yeah.
So I talked about the key indicators of flow, right? Losing sense of time, sense of self, that list. And that's the first place to start for everyone, because everyone gets in their flow state. It's not just for musicians and athletes and artists and writers.
Do you know that less than 75% of people do not get enough sleep? I know for years that this was something I struggled with. I would fall into bed exhausted, only to then toss and turn all night long and wake up feeling unrested. Sleep is critical to our health, well being, and productivity. I am so excited to partner with Lisa Gibb and Sam V, who have crafted the perfect night's sleep. We cannot walk around like sleep zombies the next day. Lisa and her team at Sam V understand this. And with over 40 years of quality craftsmanship, Somvi sheet sets are designed to create a perfect environment to offer you a restful night's sleep. They use the highest quality fabrics, and they have products that focus on temperature regulation. Ladies, you know what I mean about that. With their products that include mattress enhancers to sheet sets, lots of different kinds of unique pillows, comforters, blankets, and more. They literally have you covered and ready for a quality night's sleep. All the products with Somv will wrap you in luxury each and every night. The people at Somv are committed to one thing: a quality night's sleep. So connect with Lisa Gibb, your personal sleep consultant, and build your personal and luxury sleep package today. Connect with Lisa at www.lisagibb.somnvie.com. Invest in your rest with Somv today.
Everyone gets into flow, right? Where do you get into flow, Kara?
I was
Sarah?
just thinking of that. And one of the things you mentioned is, again, losing the sense of time and also energizing. One of the courses that I teach is a 4-day course. So it's 8 hours. I'm basically there an hour before, a little bit after. So it's almost, a 10-hour day on my feet for 4 days straight. And people always ask me, aren't you exhausted? And I'm like, no, I actually feel very energized at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Now, when I get on the airplane to fly home, I might be and the next day, but when I'm in it, because I'm in my flow state. And, I think bringing it back to also what you talked about by bringing in the speaking and the violin, at first, those seemed like two separate worlds. But what you did is you found a way to bring it together. And I think it's so beautiful because, again, when you can bring your flow state, when you can bring that moment into, again, what you are passionate about, that's really where the magic happens.
Yeah. And that's what I'm really holding space
Mhm.
for everyone to experience what you just described. And, 40, what did you say? 40 hours in 4 days, right? Of work, standing on your feet, right? I mean, that's, and yes, when my husband played in the orchestra too, we couldn't sleep after a concert because it's so invigorating, but in a
Mhm.
good way. We didn't mind that
Yeah.
we couldn't sleep.
Right. Mhm.
And the thing is, I do have to close the loop for those of you who are worried about my son, because now he's 27. He climbed out of his depression all by himself, and I think that he saw my husband and I, who always were following our passion of playing music and doing the things that always were fulfilling for us. And as soon as he graduated from high school, he literally went straight to the municipal airport, signed up for pilot lessons. We didn't even know he wanted that.
Because
And
that
he,
was inside of him, and he probably didn't even know until he was able to give himself permission to go after what lit him up on the inside.
yeah, he didn't
Mhm.
even go to college. He just went straight and hired out the teachers, got the training, and now he's got this amazing job as an Alaskan bush pilot. Um, Goes out and services all of these remote villages that otherwise wouldn't, have the goods and the services without, people flying in and out. So just wanted to make sure people weren't like hanging, like,
No,
whatever
I
happened to
appreciate that
him?
because I was wondering. And I just think again, so much reflection right now going through this, and looking at my own son who really doesn't like school at all. And, he's like, well, maybe I'll go to college. And I was like, why? Don't
Yeah,
go to please me. If that's not your jam right now, don't do it. He loves fitness. He's really into powerlifting. And I'm like, you know what? If that's what you want to do, this is your year. This is the time, go for it. And
yeah,
maybe see if you can even get a job, sort of in that realm.
yeah,
And doing that and giving him the freedom to again find yourself.
yeah.
So I love the ideas of looking for these things, such as, where is it that you lose sense of time? Where is it that you find your joy and, what lifts you up? Now,
Mhm.
there are going to be some people who have a job and some people who find that flow state outside of their job. And I would imagine that even doing that can help you again do this because not everybody can leave their job. Not everybody can
Right.
make a living doing their flow state. But you still can find space for it. So how do you encourage people, even if it's only a small little spark to kind of ignite that and get that going?
Let me share a story with you.
Please.
So, one of the ways that I teach people to get into their flow state is to basically recreate a memory of a time when you were in flow. So, using those key indicators, losing sense of time, sense of self, ideas and insights coming in from out of the blue, things coming together with the sense of ease, that positive feedback loop, and then, just feeling really joyful about what you're doing. And once you have a memory of a time, you can reverse engineer it. And so the three questions are where, what, and why. And so, where are you? Just locate that. So the story I want to share with you is my mom, prolific painter, but she also had a corporate job. But
Mm,
let's start with the painting, because you said, what if people have a passion outside of work? How do you bring it to work, right?
yeah.
So this is the example I want to give you. So passionate about painting, and where she was in her home artist studio that she created herself. Just locate it. The next question is what? What are you doing? Now, this is a two-part question, right? What are you doing? For my mom, she was painting, right? Captain Obvious. But the real question, the second question is, what are you doing on the inside? And so if you'd say, hey, mom, how's your painting going? Because she would spend months doing a painting. So most of the time, she wasn't beginning a painting or ending a painting. She was somewhere in that middle place, right? And she would always say, I'm resolving it. Now, that meant something to her.
Mhm.
Okay. Somebody, let's say if somebody where they get into the flow state the most is in their office, what they're doing on the outside is working on an Excel spreadsheet. Many people get into flow working on Excel spreadsheets.
Mhm.
What they're doing on the inside could be any number of things. Maybe you're visioning, maybe
Yeah.
you're problem solving, maybe you're strategizing, right? So what you do on the inside is what makes you tick. That's one of those things when you define that for yourself, it really hones in on that piece of you that lights you up.
Mhm.
Okay, so my mom, she's resolving things. Now, why? Why to me is the last question, and it pertains to, oh, we've heard this so many times. What's your why? What's your passion, right? I like to think of this as the highest values that are so beyond yourself that these are the things that pull the best out of you.
Mhm.
So we're talking about values like love or joy or peace or freedom or equality, right?
Yeah.
Self actualization, expansion, whatever it is for you. For me, it's unity. Anyways, I knew my mom very well. It was all about freedom of speech, getting that paint on those
Mhm.
paintings and, doing it in a way that made a story. Like, so what you do on the inside, for her, it was resolving things. And why it's so meaningful, for her, it was freedom of speech.
Yeah.
When you define these two things for yourself, you can now know how you get into flow state. And so when you're off, you
Mhm.
can conjure it up by just saying, how can I resolve something right now?
Yeah.
How can I be in that place where I'm creating freedom of speech right now? So, her corporate job, if she came home at the end of the day and you'd say, hey, mom, how was your day? You know what she would say? I resolved some things.
I was going to say, yeah, she brought it back in because that's how she operated.
That's how she operates.
It's so interesting that you bring this up because, one of the things that I get asked a lot is, again, how do I define success? And a big part for me is I ask myself three questions at the end of the day. Did I show love? Did I impact the world positively? And did I inspire today? And as you were going through that exercise, I was thinking of another flow state that I'm in, other than stage, is when I'm driving in the car doing road trips. In the
Yes.
car, what am I doing? I am creating. And why am I creating? I'm creating to deliver impact. So it's interesting that my words that define if the day was successful have kind of the same language, just like your mother did with the resolving.
Way cool.
That's cool. Yeah.
Let me give you another example of, private, work versus, getting into flow outside of work. I speak for a lot of HR conferences. This one gentleman came up to me and he says, "Can we talk?" I said, "Sure, let's schedule something," right? And his whole reason for reaching out was, he says, "I know I get into flow state. I just don't know how I do it at work. I really want to increase that time at work." So right before we got on the call, I jumped onto his LinkedIn, and next to his job title, it says avid skier. And I'm like, oh, this guy gets into flow all the time, right? So we get on the call and I said, "We're not talking about work. Let's talk about skiing. So how do you get into flow?" And he goes, "Oh, easy peasy. I jump onto the lift and I've got a routine. I have this system to clean my goggles. Like I get them like so clean. They're just perfect. Put on the goggles. Then I set up my playlist to listen to. By the time I've got that set up, I got the goggles on, the earbuds in, we're at the top of the lift. All I have to do is jump off and I become one with the snow." And like literally, didn't even have to say anything. Like without missing a beat, he's like, "Oh, wait a
Mhm.
minute.
Yeah.
I do that at work all the time.
Mhm.
It's just different."
Yeah.
Now, when you go skiing, you can't just like randomly go, "I'm going to go skiing." You do have to have a time block, right?
Right. You
And he
have a
goes,
routine, you
"Okay."
have a system.
Yeah. He's like, "Oh my gosh. Here's what I do. I have a time block for a project. The first thing I do is I clean my desk. Then I put on the set list.
Yep.
And then it happens." So, when I talked about these three questions, where are you, what are you doing, and why? For him, it was the where, it was the environment, creating the environment.
Yeah.
And because he defined these things for himself, all of a sudden he had that insight about, oh, I do it on the ski lift. I do it at work too. I just didn't realize it. When you define it, you own it.
I love that. Oh my God. Diane, I could talk to you for hours more, and I know we probably could have even deeper conversations, but we are going to have to start wrapping this up. And one of the things I really want to highlight is you have a book that just came out. So tell us a little bit about your book.
So excited about the book. Since we last spoke, the pre-launch has started, and it's actually hit number one on some categories. I'm like, what? So it
Congratulations.
was business management. Oh no, it was called motivational business management. And what's interesting is when I was talking about niches earlier on, um, I would have never known to tag that
Mhm.
as a reflection of my content. And as soon as I heard it, I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's perfect." Motivational business management. Because in that book, you'll find very specific steps for you to get into your flow state. You'll find out all of the information that I already talked about, the key indicators, the hormones that get into your system, like flow is a real thing, the positive psychology, like all of that's in there. And it talks about the energetics of flow. It also talks about how, as a violinist, I led the orchestra without using a single word, right? I
Mhm.
was performing. So, how do you energetically lead? The energy of influence is flow, is getting into your flow. And I get into that in the book as well. I also talk about how to create flow culture at work. So, there's a lot of things in there. It's called Flow Unlock Your Genius, Love What You Do. And I do have a free handout for everybody listening to this. And what it is it's like an outline of everything that we talked about today, plus some next steps.
Mhm.
But the reason why I want people to have it is because it's got that flow strategy worksheet in it.
Love
And I would love for people to have that.
Absolutely. So we're going to put the link for that in the show notes. So I encourage all of you to go and get that and identify for yourself because, again, once you know that, you can unlock so much. And, Diane, this has just been such a great conversation. It's really, hit some chords with me and got me thinking about some things for myself so I can, even serve at a higher level and have deeper connections. So the last question I have for you before we say goodbye today is when you think about where you are today, all the lessons that you've learned up until this point in time, how do you define success for yourself now?
Well, the first thing that came to my mind was that I have always said yes to myself.
Mhm.
I know I had a brief stint where I was off when I was taking care of my mom, but once she had moved on, I was like snapped right back to, okay, how can I say yes to myself in this journey? So, yeah. And then the other piece I think I already mentioned too is like already knowing that you can be doing anything. The thing about flow state is that it's not passive. Like going with the flow is passive. The
Mhm.
flow state is based on action and and in that action, you might feel like it's feeling like flow, right? But it's still very action oriented, and so I think it just blends that whole concept of doing good work, but yet doing it with something that's very moving for you, and that's basically get into your work like a musician gets into the music.
Love it. Well, Diane, thank you again. I am so excited to share this. And I know that many people are going to be able to resonate and take their life to the next level by understanding, what it means for them. So thank you so much. And congratulations on your book. I know you're going to have wonderful success with it.
Thank you.
What a great concept of again living in the flow. And when you're in the flow, again, that's when you're in your groove. And don't we just feel better? So, some of the things that I love that Diane talked about is again, a lot of the signs. Are you feeling numb or are you feeling alive? And I think how she said that, you can pull in because even if you have a job, there's chances are that you can again marry your flow state in some of the things you're doing, whether it's in your routines or in your environment. And I love those three questions of where are you when you're sort of in that state, that environment? What is it that you're doing? Maybe even what is it that you're saying to yourself, and then again the why, what is the purpose behind it? So again, maybe it's when you're cooking, and maybe it's when you're painting or writing or conducting a meeting or working on a project. So really looking into those. Again, are you just losing all track of time? I know that all of us have something where all of a sudden hours pass and we're like, wow, what a great day, and we're just in those. So I think really looking with those. And again, know that you don't have to have all the answers. Let it come to you because a lot of times we really start to understand and define that flow state when we're in the quiet. So I hope that this really helps you because I want all of you to live in the greatest state. I want you to live in that state of pure joy and excitement, even in the day to day operations of our work life. So let's go ahead and let's make sure that we share this with at least three other people. Really look at even sharing that assessment that Diane gave us so that you can really assess for yourself and others can do it too of how to define our flow state. Make sure that you go to the show and that you rate it and like it, review it, and keep sharing those. So thanks so much for joining today. I'm Clara Capano, and this is Women Winning Their Way.